Prepare yourself for the stupidest Dark Souls rant you've ever heard.
So, I recently finished playing through all of the Dark Souls games for the first time, back to back. Well, okay, technically 3 was a replay because I cleared that a few years prior, but I still went back through it for the refresher. Also, I wanted the Usurpation of Fire ending. Also because it's my favorite of the 3. I finished the replay and immediately started a new character to run it back again. Finished in 6 hours that time. That aside, I was chatting with a friend about opinions on boss fights throughout all 3 games, and eventually the conversation started to focus on mob bosses. No, not Al Capone. You know, many bodies or enemies swarming you and you gotta cut through them with big swings of your greatsword. I don't know any other way. Strength builds for life. Anyways, we kept talking, and my friend started disagreeing with me on what he considered to be a mob boss. That's fine, that's the point of having a discussion, sharing opinions and thoughts. But as we kept going back and forth and looking at the boss lists for each game, I started to wonder, what actually is the definition of a mob boss? And when I began comparing them, trying to come up with a definition for a mob boss in Dark Souls, I ended up with an existential crisis instead. So follow along on this stupid little thought experiment to define a mob boss in Dark Souls. And we are only doing Dark Souls here, not the whole Soulsborne universe. Chill. We can easily toss aside any bosses that are one-on-one, mano-y-mano, which is a sizable amount. I also think duo bosses don't really count either, like Ornstein and Smo or Demon Princes. Those are 2 distinct boss-level entities coming at you at the same time. 3's company and all that. So what can we immediately call a mob boss? Well, the most obvious one my brain jumps to is Deacons of the Deep. It's a lot of dudes that look the same and you gotta cut through the chaff to get to the diamond in the middle, which is the HP bar. Another easy mob boss is the Royal Rat Authority, a bunch of similar looking... Royal Rat Vanguard, fuck. Another easy mob boss is the Royal Rat Vanguard, a bunch of similar looking rats, and then there is the big rat that makes all the rules running around with the haircut, and that's the one you gotta hit. The whole conversation with my friend Liam started when we were comparing the games, and I brought up how Dark Souls 2 really loves mob bosses, and that my favorite in that game was probably the Skeleton Lords. I thought the mobs were easy to deal with, and instead of just 1 asshole to hit, there's 3. Overall, not terrible in my eyes. Liam kinda objected for a moment, pointing out that the only thing you really have to hit are the 3 lords themselves, and that the rest of the skeletons are useless. But I just said it's the same as Deacons, and he came around to it. So from there, we decided to keep looking at more mob bosses in DS2, and immediately came across Royal Rat Vanguard. So here's where things started getting tricky. My friend says that Royal Rat Vanguard isn't one he'd consider a mob boss, but rather a clone boss, a fight where you have a bunch of enemies that all look the same, but only one of them is the real boss. Another enemy that would fit in this category is the Crystal Sage of Dark Souls 3, or maybe the Dark Lurker, wouldn't know, didn't do it, but also, maybe this could be considered a subset of mob bosses? Look, we're 2 likely autistics sitting in a Discord call discussing what defines a mob boss. We're gonna have some weird, highly specific takes. But then, that's when we started to get into the weeds of it. That's when we ran into the boss that started the downward spiral of this whole definition. The Duke's dear Freya. Because when you look at it, most people would just consider this to be a one-on-one fight. You're only really fighting Freya herself with her 2 faces. But she's also surrounded by a bunch of spiders that don't actually affect the health bar at all. Now yes, you can completely ignore the spiders if you bring a torch, but they are still a part of the fight, and they will swarm you if you don't know that factoid. Now typically, I think people would consider Freya a solo fight, one-on-one, but if we're being consistent, she falls under the definition. And so from there, the whole house of cards began to crumble, because if Freya counts as a mob boss, how many others do? Gravelord Nito is a big dude surrounded by tons of smaller, meaningless dudes that don't affect his health bar. Or what about Executioner's Chariot? No, don't click off, just think about it for a second. The only thing you're really doing damage to is the horse, But to get to that part, you have to reach the lever that lowers the gate. And to get there, you have to fight through a bunch of skeletons and 2 necromancers that aren't tied to the health bar. You see where the issue starts to come in? This definition, as I and possibly you think of when it comes to mob bosses, has a far wider scope than initially considered. So I went through every boss in the series, consulted with more friends, and came up with the following list of bosses that fall into this definition. There will be subcategories named when relevant, so strap in for the most pedantic list of all time. Tauros Demon. Already a weird one, but technically a mob boss because of the 2 skeleton archers on the tower with the ladder behind you. Capra Demon. This one may fall into the subgenre of gank bosses, another term I've heard for mob bosses in Souls. You've got the big asshole demon and his 2 fucking pit bulls that run you down instantly. Very annoying. And until you deal with the dogs, you're basically fighting a gang. Centipede Demon. Even I feel iffy on this one, but you could consider it... You could consider it a mob boss since it spawns chaff enemies if you cut off its limbs. I don't know, we'll just keep him here for now. 4 Kings. Now, this one, I have a new subcategory to bring up. One of the other friends I consulted on this list plays WoW, and he said that they have a term for fights like this where you take on multiple equally boss-level enemies at once in a group of 2 to 4 at a time. Council. So I think we can count 4 Kings as a council fight, and having the potential to become a mob boss if your DPS sucks ass and they start piling up. Gravelord Nito, the only pure-blooded mob boss, according to the definition, from Dark Souls 1. He's got tons of skeletons that keep coming back, and his health bar is the only one that matters. Check. Pinwheel. This one probably falls under the clone boss archetype, but I guess he'd count. Most of you might not have even known he has clones that he summons, you beat him that quickly. Executioner's Chariot. As explained prior, the only health that matters here is the horse, so you gotta get past all the skeletons and necromancers to pull the lever. Also counts as a gimmick fight. Actually, switch it. This is a gimmick fight with a mob boss sub-theme. Fuck it, who cares anymore? The Skeleton Lords. Now this is a true blue mob boss as we've defined it. 3 big dudes, all part of 1 health bar, surrounded by tons of varying bony chaff. Great example. Belfry Gargoyles. This falls under the council definition again, similar to 4 Kings. The next gargoyle only shows up when you reduce the newest one's HP to half, so as long as you pay attention, you won't get mobbed. But it can happen. Ruin Sentinels. There's 3 of them. They're all the same enemy. Council fight. Covetous Demon. So I had to be told about this one, but I looked it up. If you look upwards in his arena, there are undead dangling from the ceiling, and if you knock them down somehow, the demon will go after them to eat them. Still technically multiple dudes that can possibly be in the fight, so... Mob Boss. Royal Rat Vanguard. Another good example to most people probably, and also a clone fight. Many identical rats, and then there's one with a mohawk that you have to kill. So, as Brian David Gilbert put it,
just an episode of Undercover Boss.
Royal Rat Authority, a really shitty example. Not in the sense that it doesn't meet the requirements, it certainly does. It's just a really ass boss. Fuck that thing. The Duke's Dear Freya, the one that started this whole debacle. Debacle. As stated earlier, Freya's health is all that matters, but she's surrounded by tons of normal spiders that can be ignored if you carry a torch during the fight. Nashandra. Technically speaking, she summons floating soul things that can be destroyed and inflict curse on you as long as they are around.
That's a
Ilana, the Squalid Queen. Apparently, if you take too long to kill one of her minions, she will eventually summon another one anyways. Mob boss potential? Probably. Dark Lurker. Looks like he summons other copies of himself, so clone boss, again, I wouldn't know, because I didn't do it. Grave Robber Trio, the definition of a gank boss. They're called the gank trio for a reason. I didn't do this one either. Burnt Ivory King. So this one is interesting because the mob phase comes before the actual boss, but is still mandatory in order to get to the actual boss fight. And there certainly are a lot of dudes, even ones that fight for you. Pretty sick. Curse Rotted Greatwood. You walk in the arena, and there's a bunch of dudes from the undead settlement scattered around, and they will get up to attack you. That's a mob boss, people. Crystal Sage, the definitive clone boss. You hit her, and then she pisses off, and then you hit her again, and she pisses off some more, all while dodging spells like you're in a bullet hell. Abyss Watchers. I guess this is a council fight? You get the main guy, and then a second one shows up to beat your ass, but then the third comes to bail you out as long as you don't hit him. I think this counts. Deacons of the Deep. The quintessential mob boss of the series. Like, there is no other fight that even compares to the definition of main guy surrounded by chaff. And if you're doing strength build, it is unbelievably satisfying to swing your massive weapon through a horde of ghouls and just hear all the hits connecting. I love it. Also, my favorite Dark Souls meme uses this song.
Oh God!
Ancient Wyvern. Still technically a mob boss. You gotta run past a bunch of meaningless dudes to get to the end and jump off a cliff to one-shot the boss. Yes, this is also a gimmick fight. God, this list is so stupid. And finally, perhaps the dumbest inclusion of all, Dragon Slayer armor. You're only really fighting him, but those pilgrim butterflies are throwing magic at you during the whole second phase. They might be out of your reach, but you are not outside of theirs. But you know, it still really bugs me. Something about this just stinks. Because personally, I don't feel like any of these truly meet the definition of a mob boss. Deacons and Skeleton Lords are the closest, sure, but in reality, you're still just going after one guy. Even if you have to mow the lawn to get to them, the health bar only moves when you hit the one guy. And I feel like if you want to be called a true mob boss, then every enemy should count towards the whole. A collective of comrades, if you would. It's just a shame that there's no boss that... Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Of course there is! From the one game in the trilogy that loves throwing so-called mob bosses at you. We actually got a true to form mob boss, one where every enemy contributes to the health pool. Prowling Magus and Congregation! We found it! The one true mob boss! One of the shittiest bosses in the series! Woo! Oh wait, Prowling Magus is our only true mob boss? That shit-smeared toll booth of a fight leading up to Freya, where you just kick the snot out of some unarmed meats praying to their Oshi? Maybe this is why we don't have any more real mob bosses in Dark Souls.